Hello, and welcome to the Golden One Credit Union Empowerment Podcast, where we come together to explore financial health and the overall well-being of our community. As a not-for-profit, member-owned credit union, we're dedicated to empowering your financial journey and helping you achieve a brighter, more secure future. We live in culturally diverse communities filled with people of all ages who have hearts and minds of gold. Welcome to the Empowerment Podcast, Community Minds of Gold channel, where we celebrate the richness of community wisdom and generosity. We'll dive into authentic experiences, financial insights, and success stories shared by our community members and local celebrities. Together, we can be golden. Hello, and welcome to Community Minds of Gold. I'm Courtney McKinney, and joining me today is Enneagram expert and my friend, Stephanie Barron Hall. Stephanie is an Enneagram personality type practitioner, owner of 9 Types Co-Consulting, and author of the books The Enneagram in Love and the upcoming Enneagram in Real Life. Thank you for joining me today, Stephanie.
Thanks so much for having me.
I almost called Steph because I call her Steph, but her name is Stephanie.
On the regular, yep.
And we met actually at a Creative Morning SAC event here in Sacramento, and found out very quickly that we were both from the same, very close by area of North Dallas. So I love knowing you. I love that we're friends now, and I'm really excited to have you here to talk about Enneagrams and to talk about money and to talk about how those two things converge. So first, though, before we start going right in, we like to ask people some warm-up questions. So the first one I want to ask you is, do you know the difference between a bank and a credit union?
I don't.
Do you have any guesses?
Okay, I think that bank is for profit and credit unions are not for profit.
Yes.
Okay.
That's it. That's great. That's exactly the answer, yeah. So another part of credit unions, since it's not for profit, is we do a lot of community reinvestment. So we do things like this, where we bring in community members, or we provide scholarships and grants and lots of give back and volunteer. So that's another part of a credit union. It's like a community co-op for your money.
Cool.
Yeah. One more. Okay, can you share a favorite pastime or hobby that is absolutely free?
Ooh, I love to go hiking, and I love to take my dog on long hikes. I mean, he's getting a little bit old now, so it's more challenging, but we love to just go hiking. It's really fun.
California is really good for hiking.
It's beautiful.
A little bit better than North Texas.
Better than Texas.
Yeah. Okay, so let's dive in. You are an Enneagram practitioner. Mm-hmm. Not everybody knows what that means. So can you please give us a little rundown on what it means and why the Enneagram is a pathway you've chosen for your career and for your writing?
Sure. So the Enneagram is a motivation-based personality system oriented around 9 core types. And what that means is that there are these different archetypes, and each of us has, this kind of innate way that we move through the world, and this driving why that motivates us beneath the surface. So the Enneagram really focuses on those whys rather than looking at your outer behavior. Like, say, we might do some of the same things, but for different reasons. And so it's really looking at those underlying reasons. And I have always been into personality test anything. I just like to understand what makes us tick. Mm-hmm. But I've found that the Enneagram is so different than a lot of the other systems that I've used, like Myers-Briggs or DISC, which all have their place. But I like the Enneagram because it's really about why you do what you do. And so it's beneath the surface. And what is helpful about that as well is that it works in the workplace and at home. So I have a lot of my clients come back from, a session, and they're like, oh, my spouse said I did this, or my partner said I did this. And it's really useful in both those ways.
So it's a very comprehensive personality assessment, it sounds like. Okay. What part of your life and upbringing do you think caused you to gravitate toward? You said you really just like personality tests in general. Is there a part of your background that you think made you gravitate toward that?
I think it's because I'm a middle child.
Yeah, okay.
So even when I was a kid, I remember reading these books that would say, if your favorite color is this, then it means this about you. Or if your favorite ice cream is this, it means this about you. And I love to dissect those and understand, like, why do I feel like a kind of the odd one in the family sometimes? And that just sent me down this rabbit trail.
And there's enough on the rabbit trail for you to write books about it. Like, what do you think are the components of it that make it so rich in content, and you can explore for years and never not get tired of it. It sounds like.
Well, first off, it's very growth oriented. So I think that's something that some of the other personality systems somewhat lack. They describe where you are right now, but the Enneagram shows you where you've been and where you could go if you'd like to. And so I think that's really useful. I also find that it is really useful for relationships. So in particular in communication. So a lot of my days when I'm not writing, I work in corporate. So I go into talk with teams and organizations and help them understand how they communicate and why they communicate the way that they do, and then how they can kind of move forward and communicate better.
So is that how they communicate externally or internally or both?
Both, yeah. So, well, in terms of the Enneagram, there are actually some studies, not specifically Enneagram studies, but about intrapersonal, so inside the self, and interpersonal communication. So we know that anytime you're doing interpersonal communication, intrapersonal, so inside the self, is also happening. And why that's important is because we need to understand what's happening in the words that we're, or the ideas or the thoughts or whatever else is kind of circling internally, because that will help us improve our interpersonal communication.
That makes a lot of
the
sense.
Enneagram is like a way to unlock that.
That makes a lot of sense. So what is your type?
Type 3.
And what does that mean to you?
So when I first learned the Enneagram, I thought, oh my gosh, I hate my type, which is very common. Okay. A lot of people feel that way. And the reason for that is because it really showed me some blind spots that I was not really comfortable with being aware of. And so type 3 is motivated by this need to be successful and admired and for people to say, oh, wow, you're doing a great job. And which can be a good thing, right? 3s have an ability to go into a room and connect with anyone and kind of be a chameleon. They shapeshift, they kind of modify how they show up depending on who they're around. But what ends up happening is you get lost, right? So the person that you actually are ends up lost in kind of that shuffle of who do I need to be in this room, or who will think that I'm doing great if I do X, Y, or Z. And it can be really challenging to get back to, okay, who am I and who do I want to be? And how can I let my values lead the way forward? And so for me, it's been really interesting to kind of let go of a lot of the workaholism that 3s are very prone to, and actually find a way to move more in line with my values.
That makes a lot of sense. And it reminds me of something you had us do the test, and I was a 4. And at first I was like, okay, sure, this makes sense, independent, minded, whatever. And at a separate occasion, you had said something about, I was like talking about comparing myself to somebody, and you're like, type 4 is comparison. And you said that, like the shadow that you don't necessarily want to see. Yeah. And it was funny because you said that, and I was like, oh, I do compare myself too much. It's helpful. It's helpful to be able to catch it and know that you're not alone.
Yeah, to know you're not alone, and then to know, oh, there's actually something I can do about this.
Yeah. All right. So here on the podcast, we intentionally talk about money because we're a credit union, and it can be tricky because some of us don't grow up talking about it. So we're trying to change that dynamic a little bit here by just going into it and talking about it. So thank you for participating in this endeavor. So in that spirit, do you feel comfortable talking about money? Why or why not? And do you think the answer has anything to do with your Enneagram type?
Ooh, I feel comfortable talking about money in a theoretical sense.
Okay, say more.
Like, I think it's interesting. For a long time, my favorite movie was The Big Short. I was just very interested and curious about these concepts. But when it comes to my own personal finances, I think it can be really challenging. I didn't grow up talking about money or learning anything about money. And so it's been really interesting as an adult to discover that for myself and to understand how to navigate that.
Mm-hmm. Do you think that that's part of your Enneagram type?
I do think that wanting to know what the right answer is definitely part of my Enneagram type. I also think that probably the way that I interact with money is also part of my Enneagram type.
Okay. Mm-hmm. So you mentioned that you didn't grow up talking about money. So I'm guessing that means the adults in your life didn't really talk much about it openly with you or overhearing it with each other. Do you have an early memory, like a first early memory of being aware of like what money can do or the role it plays?
Well, I mostly just remember not having any. So
Yeah.
I think that's like a key memory for me. And just being like, oh, money is stressful and there's never enough. And so that was kind of the core message that I received about it.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's the core message a lot of us receive about it. Are there Enneagram types that are better at handling and or discussing finances than others? And can you share a few thoughts about how different types may interact with issues pertaining to money and finances?
Sure. So certain types I think are better at it. Not necessarily money in general, but I think a lot of the time we expect money to be about numbers, but it's actually about our feelings. And I think certain types are better at compartmentalizing their feelings and going into, let's just look at the numbers. So for example, when I was working on my book, I interviewed 30 people of different types, and one of them, he was a type 8, and he shared that he loves being his own boss because he really likes knowing what he can expect to come in, right? And so he goes over his expenses and his income multiple times per week just to have a handle on everything. So he really likes the autonomy and he likes the control. Now, other people would say, well, I don't really want to be in control of all that. I just want somebody to put a check in my account. And so there are those different aspects.
Have you seen that there are certain personality types or Enneagram types that trend toward entrepreneurship?
Yeah. So types 7 and 8 in particular are really like that because they're kind of the most rebellious.
Okay.
And they don't, well, actually, and now that I think about it, 4s as well. But 7s and 8s are very action oriented and they don't like to be told what to do. And so they really thrive when they either, if they're in a workplace, if they have a really super competent leader that gives them kind of the freedom to say, this is the goal, figure out a way to meet that. Or if they are self-employed and they go into that entrepreneurship role.
Cool. Can you said a little bit about the process for the book, Enneagram in Real Life. Can you tell us a little bit more about what the book is focused on and what it means? I mean, it's pretty self-explanatory from the title, but can you tell us a little bit more?
Sure. So I have been speaking and talking and writing about the Enneagram for about 6 years now, mostly on Instagram. And then, like I mentioned, I do work with teams and organizations. And when I would go on Instagram, I'd log in and I would have all these DMs from people saying, okay, I know my type. What do I do with it? Right? So I think that's a great question. And I think there wasn't enough information for people to really understand what to do next. And so I started interviewing people, just doing customer surveys, right? I didn't have any product at that moment, but I wanted to hear what people needed and wanted. And so they told me. And so I created a course that was an online course for people to go through. And I took several groups through. I did a cohort model, which was really fun. I think that in particular, the Enneagram is really, really useful in communication, in dialogue, that you have a lot more insight together. And so from there, I asked people, hey, after you sell something, why didn't you buy, right? You've got to ask people that. So I said, why didn't you buy? And somebody wrote back and said, oh, it should be a zine. It's too long as a course. It should be a zine. And I was like, okay.
Well, what?
A zine, an online, magazine.
Okay.
They wanted something short and short and sweet and pithy.
Okay.
Not 300 plus pages, but we'll get there. So I saw that feedback and I thought, you know what? The script for this course is 55,000 words. So that could be a book. And so I started working on it and developing the concepts and fleshing them out more. And it has totally morphed and changed. And I've rewritten it 5,000 times since that moment. But that's kind of where it came from. So that's one part of it. The other part is that I do typing interviews, meaning I sit down and I say, how assertive are you? And you tell me how assertive you are. And I interpret all your responses. And then we discuss together what the evidence shows based on the questionnaire.
Okay.
And it's a specific set of questions that I always ask the same way, which is helpful because then I have all this data of all these hundreds of other people that I've worked with and how they respond to those. And at the end of those, I would say, okay, well, these are the types that kind of are showing up for me. And they would say something like, well, I'm not successful enough to be a 3, or I'm not perfectionistic enough to be a 1. And what I realized is not only did people not know what to do with their type once they found it, but they also didn't have enough depth of knowledge about the types to really know what to do with it either. Mm-hmm. So I wanted to create something that offered that depth of knowledge.
And this does that.
Yeah.
Cool. And then is it like companion to your online presence, and does it kind of go off of each other?
Yeah, a lot of the questions that I get asked all the time, there's a specific concept within the Enneagram that we do not have time for today, but it's called subtypes. And people always ask, like, how do I figure out my subtype? That is in detail in this book.
Cool.
Because that's something that people want to know.
Cool. Okay, well, so the book is called Enneagram in Real Life, and there's not much that's more real than finances and money. But can you give us a taste of what other real life scenarios the book can help people think about?
Sure. So I think one of the main things is that we all want this concept of growth, right? Like a lot of us, but we question, what does that actually mean? And how does that actually help me? And I think a lot of the time we focus on things like relationships, and I think it's useful to always think about your relationships and how you are in your community. But sometimes we also have to do some inner work as well. Mm-hmm. And so I have really practical, like journaling exercises, or for example, something that's not journaling, because some people get tired of that. So for some types, I recommend things like doing your favorite hobby. Maybe it's gardening or cooking, but really sensing how your body feels when you're doing it. So smelling the smells or feeling what the dirt feels like, kind of going into that instead of kind of going on autopilot, which a lot of us tend to do. And so that's one of the ways that I think it can be useful.
Okay. That goes into the next question, which is, Golden One's a credit union, and we talked about how that means reinvesting in the community. And so I'm wondering, and you kind of mentioned this, but how do you see knowledge of self and personality type in relationship to an individual's place in their community? Do you have thoughts about healthy community relationships that transcend different types?
I think self-knowledge is helpful because of what we were talking about earlier with the intrapersonal communication. So what's happening within yourself. And when you're aware of, I'm going out in the world today and I didn't sleep all that well, maybe I'm, a little tired, maybe I'm a little hungry, whatever else might be happening for you. If you understand, maybe I had a fight with my partner, whatever. If you are aware of that and understand that, then you're not going to get as triggered when you just have, a community interaction. You can be like, okay, I understand what's happening for me, but that doesn't mean I have to react because of that. And I think that's really useful because that shows, generosity and kindness versus, sometimes we're a little bit on a hair trigger, and I don't think that's very useful for building community. Yeah.
Do you think that that's pretty common, people not understanding how those interactions, like a fight with a partner or something, can interact as they go through the world?
I mean, it certainly seems that way. And I think one of the things that I noticed, I was on Instagram kind of in this content creator role before the pandemic began. And during the really stressful moments of the pandemic, there was certainly a lot more animosity and just anger online. And people take it out on people who they perceive as inanimate. And so that'd be like me. They just think,
and yet here you are, animate.
I am. And so I think I noticed that. And for me, I had to recognize, that is actually not about me. Take the feedback when it is, and then let go of the feedback when it's not. And that's helpful.
Yeah. I want to go back to something you said earlier about money being a very emotional thing. Yeah. Can you say more about that, especially in relation to how, I know there's 9 types, so you can't go through all the different types and how that might connect, but if you can pull out a few examples maybe of what that means to have an emotional relationship to money, when money is this practical thing, but we all have so many emotional attachments to it.
Sure. So one example, and I want to share also that I worked with a colleague named Deja Coley, who we developed a Money in the Enneagram workshop together. And so she gave her blessing for me to share all of this info today.
Thank you, Deja.
Yeah. And you can find her at dejacoley.com. But she has worked with so many different people in a coaching capacity specifically around money. And so one thing is, for example, type 1s. So type 1s are known as, they're sometimes known as like the perfectionist. I call them like the improver. I don't typically use those monikers, but that can be a good summary. And they really care about being good, right, and correct. They want to be not good at things, but they want to be a good, moral, ethical person. Okay. And they tend to have very strong boundaries around this is right and this is wrong. This is accurate, this is inaccurate. So very black and white. And what can happen is they get super black and white about their budget or about their parameters or about the right way to spend or the wrong way to spend. And the emotional part comes in when they make a mistake or they slip up or their partner makes a mistake. And then they just throw in the towel. Not always. Maybe they get angry sometimes. Maybe they kind of rage. Maybe they try to, maybe they get really critical of themselves. But I have seen ones where they just are like, well, whatever. If I can't do it perfectly, I'm not going to try. And that's not productive. So that's kind of one of the ways that we see that same motivation infiltrating every area of life. Or, for example, 5s. So 5s are motivated by this need to be competent and self-sufficient, and they love to research and understand everything in their minds. They're very cerebral. They really like to experience or explore things cognitively. They love a mental model. But sometimes 5s feel like they get into these really esoteric thought processes about money, and they start saying, well, it's all a construct. Everything is a social construct. Money is a construct. It is this concept that we've made up. So therefore, I don't care, right? Like, I'm not going to try for it. I'm going to decrease how much I need from the world so that I don't need money because it's like nothing anyway. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think I've met a few people like that. So now I'm wondering if they're 5s. Speaking of, do you have a go-to place where people, if they want to take an Enneagram test, can take one?
Yeah. So I have links on my website. You can find it at 9types.co/links. And there are a couple that I like. So you'll find my self-typing guide there, which walks you through the whole process. There's a website called Truity where you can take a free test. There's also a website that I really like. I think it's the most accurate. And it's called the Compass assessment. And it's from Chestnut Pies Enneagram Academy, which is one of the schools that I went to for my Enneagram education. Though I will say it is quite a bit more expensive than the other options.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I will put a plug in for doing it with a group of friends because we did, and then we looked through what was it? The guidebook?
Yeah, the self-typing guide.
Which is great. It's so thorough, and it's fun to do with a group of friends because you're kind of like going back and forth and like, oh, yep, that's you. Oh, that's you for sure. So do it in a group. It's a great like book club activity. Well, is there anything else that you want people to know, especially if they're not familiar with Enneagram? What would you want people to know about it? And then do you have any financial or money advice that you've picked up along the way?
I think what I want people to know about the Enneagram is that it can be a lot of fun, and you can have a lot of fun with friends chatting about it. And it can also be really difficult at times to understand these things about yourself and to really look at them in the eye. So just keep that in mind and give yourself a little self-compassion. It seems kind of woo-woo at times. I'm not a super woo-woo person. And so I kind of lean into the more practical sides of the Enneagram. But, if you like that other avenue, have at it. It's a great time. But keep in mind that there can be some difficult things that come up as well. So, just keep an open mind and stay curious about that. Money advice. Well, I really like a specific money podcast with Ramit Sethi. And he always talks about how this is like his favorite quote is like, how you feel about money is highly uncorrelated to the number in your bank account. And I think that's a really important thing for me to remember because I can remember times feeling great about money. And then now I look back and I'm like, oh my gosh, you had $20, girl. Like, what are you doing?
Yeah.
And times when I feel stressed about it and I'm like, oh, the numbers show something different. So I think keeping in mind that emotional side is helpful for me.
Finally, where you said a little bit already, but can you remind everyone where they can find you online?
Sure. You can find me online at 9types.co, which is my website. You can also find me on Instagram at 9typesco, all spelled out. And that is where you'll find my podcast, which is called Enneagram in Real Life, my book, Enneagram in Real Life, and all the other content that I've written over the years and shared there.
Thank you. Thank you. We're so excited to talk about this and glad to have you and be able to talk about money and your personality type. So we hope that you do go and engage with Stephanie's content online. And as we wrap up today, thank you again, Stephanie, for being here with us. And thank you to our listeners for tuning in. We hope you found today's conversation as enlightening as I did. If you enjoyed today's podcast, be sure to subscribe to the Golden One Credit Union Empowerment Podcast on Apple or Spotify. We also want to hear from you. What topics do you want to hear about? Who do you want to hear from? You can let us know online. You can send us a DM on Instagram or however you want to reach out to us. YouTube comments, you can do that too. Connect with us on Instagram, Facebook, or LinkedIn, and you can visit our YouTube channel at Golden One CU. We look forward to hearing from you and incorporating your ideas into our episodes. And don't forget to visit the Financial Wellness tab at goldenone.com, where you can explore a wealth of resources, including videos, interactive modules, and webcasts. Check out our learning lab, take advantage of the tools and courses, learn about your money personality, and manage financial stress with our money meditations, which actually goes great with Enneagram.
Yeah.
So once again, this has been Courtney McKinney wishing you financial health and happiness. And as always, stay golden. Golden One is insured by the NCUA.